It is January, although you wouldn't be able to tell by looking at it. It's more like March. But it's January at the clearing. We're down by the labyrinth, and we're going to look at cones, conifer cones today. We're going to start with white spruce, and this is a typical white spruce cone, inch, maybe inch and a half long sometimes, kind of tight scales, light brown. It's from a famous dead white spruce at the clearing. There aren't very many white spruce here, but that one's been here a long time. My guess is that it goes back to when this was the original farmstead at the clearing. What is now the large dorm, part of the west dorm. That log cabin was on this site. At one time, Jensen moved it in 1920 to where it is now. But my guess is that that white spruce was a farmyard tree back in early pioneer days here. It started looking peaked maybe 5-6 years ago. We knew it was probably dying, and it is fully dead now. We'll have to cut it down at some point before it falls and destroys the labyrinth. But I did want to show you, because we found a couple cones on the ground, what a white spruce cone looks like, and just talk a little bit about that famous tree at the clearing that won't be here that much longer. There are some of its children. There are some smaller white spruce around this part of campus. They're not old enough to make cones yet, but I'm presuming that they're children of this tree. And it was probably 120, 30 years old when it died, but it's gone now. White spruce. We're just north of that mother spruce over by the labyrinth, the one that's dead, just maybe 100 yards north of it. This is undoubtedly one of its children. This is a living white spruce, and you can tell spruce from fir. Spruce needles are real prickly, and if you take one off and try to twirl it in your finger, it turns. It's square, so you can turn it in your finger. Fir needles are flat. Here's a fir right here. It's a balsam fir right here, and they have flat needles, and they won't turn in your fingers, and they're often confused. But here's a younger white spruce, a child of the one over by the labyrinth. This is common juniper, the most common conifer in Door County for sure. And here it is in its winter color, this kind of brownish, a little bit purple sometimes color. It's one of the reasons people don't like this plant, because they think it's so ugly in the winter. It's just its winter color. It's a plant I happen to like. Junipers, all junipers, and there are many different species, are dioecious. That means two house in Latin, separate male and female plants. So all junipers are dioecious, and the females, like this one, produce what we commonly call a juniper berry. But if this is a conifer, and it is a conifer, then this has to be a cone. It doesn't look like a cone, but it's a modified cone. And we call them juniper berries, and you can buy jars of them in the herb section or the spice section in grocery stores, and people use them for different culinary purposes. It's also the juniper species. This is Juniperus communis. It grows all around the world in the northern latitudes. It's the one that is collected to flavor gin, true gin. And so this is the gin juniper, and they collect it up on Washington Island once a year for a place, I think, a distillery in Madison that makes gin. Anyway, this is a common juniper, a female with the modified cones that we call berries, and in its winter color, out in the homestead meadow at the clearing. We're just south of the labyrinth at the west end of the homestead meadow, and we're looking here at arborvitae. What many people call this white cedar. I learned it as arborvitae, which means tree of life, so that's what I always call it. It has these tightly clustered, very small light brown cones, no more than maybe up to a ½ inch long, and just with 4 or 5 scales. So fewer scales than most other conifer cones. But they're often in clusters, and over the course of the winter chickadees and other birds, small birds, will pick the seeds out of there. Very attractive on the ends of the branches, arborvitae or white cedar. We're at the entrance to the Jensen Center right at Garrett Bay Road, main drive to the Jensen Center, looking at the most outstanding white pine on the clearing property right at our entrance, which was great. Some of us theorized that maybe they put this driveway here back in 1997 because of that tree. And beautiful sugar maple too. Who knows? Anyway, white pine cones, often almost longer. We have two native pines here, white pine and red pine. These are the long cones on white pine. And they're often just slightly curved like that, almost straight, but very often kind of comma shaped. So you see in both ways. But they're 4 or 5 inches long, sometimes even bigger. And there's, of course, a seed in all conifers. Scales, these cone scales, there's a seed on the inside of that will eventually fall and fly away or be eaten by a bird. But these are the large cones for conifers around here, often with some resin on the outside of the scale like you see on that. Very, very attractive large cones on white pine. We're just west of the Jensen Center along the road that connects the front parking lot to the employee parking lot. This is Canada Hemlock, a nice big one of the nicest ones on the property. And hemlock cones are maybe just shy of an inch long usually. In winter, they're closed up like this. The scales are closed tight, but over the course of the late winter and spring, those will open up and it'll be much wider when those scales open and shed their seeds. But they're cute little cones. On hemlocks and on spruce and on pines, the cones hang down. On fir, which we're still hunting for to find a cone, on fir the cones stick straight up, but they hang down on hemlock and pine and spruce. But I've always thought that hemlocks have the cutest cones. Big tree, small cone. Canada hemlock. We were looking for a balsam fir where we could maybe get a look at a cone. They're always at the very top and on older trees. So then we remembered, we took our big Christmas tree down in the Jensen Center this morning and we just checked it, and there are some cone remnants on our Christmas tree. And you can see that balsam fir cones, like spruce cones and pine cones and hemlock cones, they don't fall whole to the ground. They fall apart scale by scale over time, and what's left behind is that central stem. It looks like a twig, but it's actually a part of the cone. It's called a rachis, R-A-C-H-I-S. So that's left behind, for a long time after the cone scales have all dropped. So balsam fir, and again, they stick straight up. They don't hang down like other conifers. Some of you might remember from last fall when we showed you this. We're just amazed they're still looking so good. I can't remember the exact species. It's a type of miniature or small puffball, but they're still doing their job, releasing their spores. Watch my foot. It's about 1 billion spores right there.